So good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you are in the world. My name is Tali Nates. I am the director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and it is a real honor and pleasure to welcome you here to an important, reflective, commemorative learning event about the 80th anniversary of the deportation to Auschwitz, mainly to Auschwitz, but not only, of course, to Auschwitz, of the Hungarian Jews. 1944 was a year of large number of deportations to Auschwitz. Today, we will focus, with the help of our friend, our colleague, our expert, really, on this issue of Auschwitz and the Holocaust, Paweł Sawicki. And we will look at specifically the deportations from Hungary today, the 80th anniversary of their deportations. But of course, 1944, as I mentioned, was a year of great numbers of deportations, not only from Hungary, but also from France, from the Lodz Ghetto, Łódź Ghetto, from Slovakia, from many, many other places, including the island of Rhodes, for example. It is a critical year, but it is the year that we remember as the year of deportations from Auschwitz. And as I said, we are so honored and absolutely privileged to have with us a friend, a dear friend, and a colleague, a partner, to come all the way from Katowice or from Poland. And that is Paweł Sawicki, who is the press officer and also an educator at the Auschwitz Memorial. Of course, we know Paweł very well because he is responsible for all the social media activity of the memorial. And if you are following the Auschwitz Memorial, you are following Paweł's work. And if you're not following yet, please do follow the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial. He is also responsible for so much more of the online offering of the Auschwitz Memorial. For example, he is the editor-in-chief of the monthly online magazine, Memoria, again, free of charge. You can just enroll and become get it once a month. It's a riveting read. He's also coordinator of the Auschwitz Not Far Away, Not Long Ago exhibition project on behalf of the Musealea project. We were happy to host Paweł with the mini exhibition of Seeing Auschwitz that we hosted all around South Africa. He is also a co-author of On Auschwitz podcast and authored the photo album Auschwitz-Birkenau, The Place Where You Are Standing, that compares 1944 images from Auschwitz to Birkenau with the authentic site of the memorial today. Paweł, of course, have a history as a former radio journalist, and he worked for many years in Polish Radio 2, authored documentary feature series, Auschwitz Between Crime and Sanctity, that used the audio testimonies from Auschwitz Memorial Archives, and so much more. But we will stop there, and Paweł, actually, the floor will be yours to tell us more about our theme tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. I have all these great memories of the 2 trips to South Africa, and also meeting Tali and the whole group that Tali organized when you came to Poland this year and last year. So this is something incredibly important, and so I really appreciate the invitation. And I'll try to do my best to not only explain what was happening in Auschwitz and also trying to show you the site a little bit, but also to give a context, because the context of the history of Hungary that finally led to the deportation of Jews, there is also in itself a very peculiar and very complex story I'll of course not go into so many details. We don't have enough time, but let me share a screen with you because I prepared a short presentation, and the question will be, and if you can confirm whether you can see the presentation and the screen at the moment.
It's
Yes.
perfect, Paweł.
So before we talk about the years that led to the deportations, first of all, we need to remember that after the First World War, Hungary, from a very large and very powerful entity as part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire as well, lost a lot of territory. And with the territory came also when we look at the Jewish population in Hungary, it was approximately 400,000 people. And then when we look at the years leading to the World War II, the strategic alliance for Hungary was Germany and Italy. And thanks to this, when we have after the First World War, the First and Second Vienna Awards allowed Hungary to annex, before the Second World War, parts of Czechoslovakia and parts of Romania. So as you can see from this map, the borders between 1938 and 1941 expanded significantly. You can see parts of Slovakia, you can see the northern Transylvania, you can see also Novi Sad and all these areas in the south. And so this was very well accepted by the Hungarian population. It boosted nationalistic sentiments, but also increased the number of Jewish population in Hungary to approximately 725,000. It's approximately 5% of the population, which is very interesting. And while in the central part of Hungary, the Jews were very assimilated, it was much different in those outskirts parts. But also when we look at the different professions, Jewish population in Hungary, for example, occupied some half of the doctor's position, half of the lawyer's position. So we have a complex history of the Jewish presence in Hungary, also because of these territorial changes. And the prime minister before the war, Paweł Teleki, and when we look at different prime ministers in Hungary, you can see that some of them were more Germanophilic, some of them were a little bit more distant to the alliance with Germany. So Paweł Teleki viewed the alliance with Germany with apprehension. His government was cautious, and for example, Hungary refused the request to participate in the invasion of Poland in 1939. And so in a way, we can see that Hungary tries to balance between cooperation and some sort of a resistance or reluctance. A lot of Polish refugees found its space in Hungary after the beginning of the Second World War, but the pressure from Nazi Germany mounted, and it culminated in the Hungarian participation in the invasion of Yugoslavia. And finally, Teleki committed suicide because of all those different moral and political implications. And so we can see this conflict within the Hungarian leadership regarding their alignment with the Nazi policies. And after the death of Teleki, we have another prime minister, Laszlo Bardosi, and he steered Hungary much closer to the Axis powers. His administration marked a significant shift towards far more aggressive anti-Semitic policies. The numbers of Jews affected expanded dramatically. And also you can study, we do not again have time for detailed reading, but you can study how the definition of a Jew in the Hungarian legislation changed. And the first one in 1938 was backed on the Nuremberg law in Germany. And then when you look at the 1939, 1941 changes, you can see a huge complication. Some groups are included. There's a big impact not only on those people who were practicing Jews, but also those who converted to Christianity. And that was not only to Roman Catholicism, but other Christian denominations. And we can see a large group of population then. And what is also very important in this part is that during Bardosi tenure, Hungary participated in military operations alongside Axis forces. And that was, for example, also part of the invasion of the Soviet Union. And Hungarian government began implementing solution to the Jewish question. And we can see, for example, a huge Aryanization of the economic life, which wasn't very successful because in a way, the part of the economy was so linked with the Jewish presence that it was almost impossible. People didn't have money to buy out the stores and so on. So far more this Aryanization was about farmland and forest rather than kind of an economy. That's one important thing. But also, we can see expulsions of some of the Jews from the Hungarian controlled territory to the German-occupied Ukraine. And Hungarian government simply hope that the Germans will deal with that. And at first, Germans are quite reluctant because it creates chaos in their lines, but they decided to murder those expelled Jews. And we can also see, and here's the photograph that you can see in front of us. This is the massacre in Novi Sad in 1942, where Hungarian forces slaughtered thousands of civilians, not only Jews, but also other groups there. And what was interesting, it seemed that it didn't have a permission from the regime. And these acts of violence were investigated. Some of the generals responsible for the orders fled to Germany. Germany didn't allow getting or moving this extradition of these people to Hungary, but we can see participation of the Hungarian regime in the crimes. And quite interesting change, and also quite an interesting story, is in the time of 1942. We have another prime minister in Hungary, Miklos Kálay, and he brought a cautious shift in Hungary's approach to its Jewish population. Kalay's government was less enthusiastic about deepening Hungary's involvement with Germany. And although it continued to meet some of Germany's military demands, it resisted calls for the mass deportation of Jews. And despite the pressure that comes from Nazi Germany, meetings and kind of meetings on the level of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hungary still doesn't allow the deportation of the Jews. And during this time, Hungary faced, different pressures. Kálay government sought to moderate the extent of anti-Jewish measures. Economic and professional sectors saw the forced exclusion of Jews going very slowly. And Hungary lacked the professional to replace Jews in medicine or industry. And something that is very interesting, and again, here you can see the picture, there was an introduction of compulsory labor for Jewish men, and they were deployed in harsh conditions to the Eastern Front. They were actually members of the army. It was part of the calling men to the army, but Jews didn't fight in those front lines. They created something like labor battalions, and they were working in the back of the front lines. And there are different treatment, there is brutality, there are casualties. But what is something very interesting is that these are Jews in the German-controlled territory fighting together with the Hungarian allies that are alive. And there are some strange testimonies of the German forces that are executing Jews in the territories of occupied Ukraine must tolerate the presence of those Hungarian Jews in the labor battalion. And actually, many of those people from the labor battalions later survived, unlike a huge portion of the Jewish population in Hungary. And then we have March of 1944. And the relative respite under Kálay ended abruptly. And in March of 1944, Hitler was dissatisfied with Hungary's reluctance to fully participate in the final solution. And this dramatic turn on events was precipitated by a meeting. And there was a false pretext in Klesheim. And actually, Horthy, the regent of Hungary, came to meet Hitler because probably he wanted to discuss that some of the Hungarian soldiers who are fighting in the Soviet Union will be able to go back to Hungary to get some rest, but also get some supplies. And Hitler gave actually Horthy a completely different line of argumentation. It wasn't the talk about the army, it was a talk about the Jews. And he gave Horthy some very stark choice. Either he will comply with the German demands, and he will allow the changes in the Hungarian government that will simply follow the German instruction, or there will be a complete military occupation of Hungary. And confronted with these threats, Horthy capitulated, and there was a significant change in Hungary's government and policies. The new government, led by a very pro-German Dome Stoyai, swiftly implemented policies aligned with Nazi objectives, including the permission to deport the Jews, which for many years the Hungarian government tried to stall. And this is the beginning of the darkest chapter, also in the Hungary's involvement in the Holocaust, because the country, because of the change in the regime, became a direct accomplice in the atrocities committed against the Jews. So here is the man, and probably many of you know the face. On March 19th, just before this official changes in the Hungarian government take place, a special SS unit led by Adolf Eichmann arrives at Budapest. And he quickly teamed up with Hungarian officials who were keen to follow his orders. We need to remember that there was a right-wing anti-Semitic party in Hungary, the Arrow Cross, and some of these ministers were members from this party. And while working with the officials, Eichmann met with Hungarian Jewish leaders, and he tries to calm them. He tries to promise them that as long as Jews cooperate and perform some labor, it will, of course, it will not be like those harsh army battalions. There will be some labor, and then there will be no problems. And he suggested that actually this cooperation might try to help them win the war. The Jews also tried to use this time, and they decided that if they showed the goodwill and they tried to work together with the Germans, they will simply buy this time. There was a situation where one of the Nazis who was coordinating this operation requested a piano to his apartment, and then from the Jewish community, and actually the Jewish leadership presented him like 8 or 9 pianos at his apartment. He said, "I'm not going to open a piano store. I just want one piano." But it also shows that the Jewish approach, that they wanted to buy time simply to survive, because they knew that the Soviets are coming, that Germany is going to lose the war. So they tried to delay, they tried to negotiate with the Germans, hoping that some bribes, agreements will first of all allow some Jews to leave Hungary, but this efforts didn't succeed. That was a misleading policy from Eichmann, and this was false promises to prevent any thoughts of resistance or escape among the Jews. And while Eichmann worked with the Hungarian officials, in Hungary they start setting up a large number of ghettos and transit camps across Hungary. These ghettos were typically located in abandoned factories, brick factories, in isolated areas of the towns. During the evictions that were needed to form these ghettos, Hungarian population stood by. And what is surprising, some people who had previously been friendly to the Jews now showed support for this action, while others didn't react. And the conditions in the ghettos were very poor. People suffered from hunger, were very often robbed by the Hungarian gendarmerie. And although some Jews were forced indeed into some slave labors, many were just spending days waiting to see what would happen. And the local officials forced them to pay different fees, contributions, which was an element of this story. And Franz Novak, who was in charge on coordinating the deportations, that was the man for the pianos, he, first of all, also managed to organize, also from the Hungarian railways, but also from other places, around 700 freight cars. And that was to move people from smaller to larger ghettos, and then directly to Auschwitz. And during a meeting with Eichmann unit, gendarmerie, rail line officials from Hungary, but also from Slovakia and Germany and the German army, they decided that they will be able to send 4 trains a day to Auschwitz, and each will be carrying some 3,000 Jewish deportees. And the trains traveled, and you can see that Hungary was divided into several sectors, and it was supposed to start from number 1, and then Budapest was left as number 6, but which also gave the Jewish population the feeling that when the deportation started is that the Germans are mainly going to deport Jews from those annexed territories, which means they will leave the central part with this Hungarian Jewish population, and those Slovak or Romanian Jews will be also there. They chose a very far lower occupied route through Košice and then Nowy Sącz and Krakow. And as I said, the initial deportations came from the Slovakia and Romania part, and it just created this impression that only Jews from specific regions will be deported. And now I would like to stop here and let to the situation in Auschwitz. But I'm not going to start from 1944. I would like to make a very brief overview of the formation of Auschwitz. So Auschwitz starts from this group of men. This is 728 men from Tarnów, mainly non-Jewish, with a group of 20 Jews, approximately 20. And this is the beginning of the story of Auschwitz, the concentration camp created in the annexed Polish territory to target political resistance in Polish intelligentsia, people who overcrowded prisons at that time. And that was the initial role of Auschwitz. At that time in occupied Poland, Jews were placed in the ghetto system, and the anti-Polish policy and the anti-Jewish policy goes kind of in two patterns that are not yet linked. And here you can see the first plan of Auschwitz in the army barracks that were located in the suburbs of this little town of Oświęcim in Polish. The Jewish name of the town is Uśpięcin, and the German name is Auschwitz. And this lighter fragment became Auschwitz I, the core camp. Then in 1941, the camp develops the farming estate, and you can see this 40 square kilometers or 15 square miles of territory taken over by the camp. And this is the Interessengebiet, the zone of interest. And this started a large farming development of the Auschwitz system. But at the same time, in spring of 1941, a huge German chemical company started thinking of building a new factory of synthetic rubber 6 kilometers from Auschwitz. And they expected the concentration camp at some point to provide them with a lot of labor force. And this is the beginning of cooperation. And because the IG Farben demanded a lot of people, a lot of slave labor, the Germans decided to use Soviet soldiers in fall of 1941. And because they didn't have enough space for these large numbers of prisoners in Auschwitz I, they decided to build a second camp for those Soviet soldiers in one of those villages expelled during this farming depopulation and the development of the zone of interest. And this is the beginning of the camp of Auschwitz II, or Birkenau. And you can see the first layout of Birkenau from fall of 1941. And at the same time, there are a few massive executions of Soviet soldiers, and the Germans shot them. And the SS started thinking that maybe they can find a better way of killing people than shooting. So in September 1941, in this basement, this is the basement of Block 11, they make an experiment of using poisonous gas, Cyclone B, to kill people, and it worked. And after this experiment, in Auschwitz, the first gas chamber is created. And this is a gas chamber where they could kill some Soviet soldiers, some groups from prisoners. It is still not part of the extermination of Jews. But this operation started in late fall of 1941. The SS are forced to transport corpses near the future Birkenau camp to mass graves. And at some point, they started developing the infrastructure of killing at Birkenau. And at some point, the transport of Soviet soldiers stopped, and the developing Auschwitz system had a problem of lack of labor. But this was already the moment when Nazi Germany decided that Jews will be exterminated, that Western European Jews will be deported to the east for extermination. So Auschwitz was told that they will get Jews now, and they will be getting transport from west of occupied Europe, and the first transport, and all these people will be chosen to be workers. So on March 26, 1942, the first official transport of Jews, and these are actually Slovak Jewish women, arrives at Auschwitz. And the first few transports were transports that were indeed of Jews were indeed transport that were chosen to be laborers. And at some point in May, June, the SS already started noticing that on those trains with Jews, they see people who are older, children, people who didn't fit into their plan. And they decided to use gas chambers to kill them. And this is an important date today, from 4th of July 1942, they introduced the permanent process of selection for the Jewish transport. So the SS doctors were employed on a daily basis to make a selection of the Jewish transport, which means most of the Jews were murdered immediately in gas chambers. Some of the Jews became prisoners of the concentration camp, and the entire infrastructure, which you can see here marked in red, was developed at Birkenau. It started with 2 very primitive gas chambers, and then 4 huge complexes of gas chambers and the crematoria were created there. And for about 2 years, the transport arrived at the old Jewish platform where from July 1942 selections took place. Here you can see the drawing made by an anonymous author. This drawing was found after the war in the ground of Birkenau, where you can see the selection of Jews happening. You can see the camp of Birkenau with this gate, which later only got the second wing in a distance. So this is where Jews are selected until spring of 1944. And here is the aerial picture. In the bottom, in the top right, you can see this many rails, and there's some building visible there. This is the Alte Judenrampe, and at the top you can see the camp of Birkenau. So that's the situation until 1944, and the rail line into Birkenau was planned from the very beginning. If I go back to this very early plan from Birkenau from October 1941, you can see that between one and another sector of the camp, there's already the rail line. So it was planned from the very beginning, but only in 1940, late 1943, the Germans started building the line. And if you look very carefully to the top of this drawing, you can actually see that there is a spur that was or here there is a spur at the very edge of the photograph leading towards the Birkenau camp, and it was built throughout spring of 1944 when the camp received information that Hungarian Jews will be deported there. And there is an interesting change in the administration of Auschwitz. In November 1943, the first commandant of Auschwitz is promoted, and this was actually punishment, but he became the deputy inspector of the concentration camp system. Arthur Liebenhenschel took over, but when the camp started getting ready for this deportation of Jews from Hungary, Höss is called back. And he starts preparing the camp for this operation. As I told you, the plan was to send 4 trains of Jews or 5 trains of Jews a day, which means approximately 15,000 people. And we can see that at the very end of April, 28th and 29th, there are 2 trains of Jews from Kistarcha camp near Budapest deported. They arrived on May the 2nd, and out of 3.8 thousand people, a little bit over 1,000 were registered as prisoners. The remainder are murdered in gas chambers. And this highlighted the Auschwitz was unprepared for such a large operation. So they decided to bring Höss back from Oranienburg on May 9th. And there is a replacement of several senior officers in the SS garrison. And then when Höss became the head of the garrison of Auschwitz, he didn't become a commandant, he became the head of the garrison. He focused on completing the Birkenau ramp, which was seen as a very important logistical improvement for the coming operation. He reactivated one of the old gas chambers, which was very primitive. He also went back to the idea of burning corpses in the open air pits. And he increased the number of the prisoners in the so-called Sonderkommando, which were mainly Jewish prisoners, men who were forced to work in the crematoria's gas chambers as this logistical forced labor. So on May 14th, 1944, when Auschwitz informed the Germans in Hungary that Auschwitz is ready, the first 2 transports left Mukachevo, and another town which I will not dare to pronounce. The Hungarian language sometimes is a huge challenge. And then the Hungarian gendarmes, during a long stop, for the last time, used beatings and threats to force the Jews to hand over the rest of their money. And when they queried about the destination of the journey, the casual answer was that they're going to a place where they would be employed to do agricultural work. And then when they left Košice, the Hungarian gendarmes were replaced by the German escort. And the next leg of the journey was throughout the mountains. The transport proceeded slowly on a single track, and this was the track that led through Košice and Nowy Sącz. It was a less occupied line that the Germans decided to use, and most of the Hungarians just went through there. It stopped frequently at station. It had to give priority to other trains. And in effect, the route from Košice to Auschwitz, which normally would take 13, 14 hours, it was around 2 days. The Jews were packed, usually 70, 80 person in a car, overcrowded conditions, oppressive heat, often without the drinking water. So this is how they were arriving at Birkenau, and some of the weakest ones were already dead before the journey ended. So this would be an introduction to the story of the 56 days of deportation of Jews from Hungary to Auschwitz. And here we go to the work that I did several years ago. This is the cover of the album, Auschwitz-Birkenau, the place where you are standing, in which you can see on one hand the 1944 pictures taken by the SS, and I'll try to explain why the Germans took the photographs then. And you can see the site of Birkenau, maybe not exactly today, a few years ago, but the contemporary site of the former camp at the same locations. And on one hand, I'll try to talk a little bit about the album, a little bit about the historical sources, but also about the challenges of finding these places today. And so here we can see a few pictures from the so-called Libby Jacob album. You can see the picture of the selection. You can see arrival on this new platform. And again, going back, this is the new platform in Birkenau. And the SS most likely, and these were taken by professional photographers from the SS garrison, Walter and Hoffmann. You can see when you look at the pictures that they were professional photographers. And you can see that they had permission to do what they were doing. Probably they wanted to create the album, which would show to the leadership of the SS how well this huge operation was conducted. And in those pictures, you see the logistics. You see many phases before the killing. You can see also what happens with the Jews who became prisoners. You do not see the killing. And this album survived because it was found by a survivor not in Auschwitz, but a survivor of Auschwitz. There is a girl in this longer line, fourth from the left. That's the girl. This is Lily Jacob, or Lily Jacob, I should actually say. And she was later transferred from Auschwitz to Mittelbau-Dora. And when she was liberated there, after liberation, she found a book. And she started looking at a few pages, and she saw that she's looking at Birkenau. She turned a few pages, and she saw her rabbi from her little town of Bilke. A few pages later, she saw her two brothers. And in this picture, she saw herself. And this album became her personal property almost until her death. And now the original is at the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. So I'm going back to this picture, and here you can see Hungarian Jewish girls after registration in Auschwitz. The building behind is a kitchen at Birkenau, and this is exactly the same location today. And a challenge which you will see is that very few buildings remained, and searching for those locations is sometimes the work of a detective. And here, something that helped us to understand where we are is, first of all, the fence, because we can see the fence that you can see on the very left-hand side of the building, but also look at the two chimneys in the middle of the kitchen. And here you can see the two chimneys that exist, and they showed us how this picture was taken. So this is exactly that location at Birkenau. And something that is also interesting is that those pictures, as you will see, were usually taken from above. And I didn't notice it at first. And I was walking through Birkenau with the large copies of those black and white pictures, and I couldn't find a proper frame. And at some point, I realized that maybe when I go higher, it will work. And it started working. Most likely the photographers used some kind of a car, an open car, or maybe they had simply something to climb higher. And I started doing this. Here you can see the picture of the platform. This is the 1944 platform. You can see on the horizon the chimneys of gas chambers number 2 and number 3. And it was so important that the platform is inside the camp because on one hand, it secured the area. But on the other hand, what is also very important, it was much closer to the gas chambers. So the SS didn't have to use trucks. The SS could simply march everyone to the gas chambers. And you can see here some prisoners. And they are mainly the prisoners from the commando, which later collected the luggage, and the luggage was taken to the special storage units. You can see Hungarian Jews that are leaving the train with their bundles here. And this is the place today. And as you can see, the picture is taken from the height of the train car. And I try to keep exactly the same frame. So you can see that there are no trees behind. This is why the level of the ground is slightly lower, it seems. And I also kept this kind of a little tilt of the space. This is the platform today. And this is how I worked, using a ladder and taking the picture from a ladder. And there were some challenges when we were trying to take the photographs, because the whole idea, and here you can see myself standing on the car of our conservators, because I didn't have a train car, for example, to climb up to take the same height. So I was using the car, and sometimes I even had to put the ladder on the top of the car. But here is the concept of this was, first of all, to present the exactly the same frames, but also doing it more or less on the same time of the day when these original pictures were taken, and they were many of them were taken in the morning. And also to have this contrast of people in the historical pictures and the empty space today. So here you can see the preparation of the selection. You can see that men and women are being separated. You can see that there's this gap in the middle, that these two lines are formed. Those people will probably not see each other again. We also historically have to remember that the selection process is only for the Jewish deportees. Non-Jews who are deported to Auschwitz, Poles, Roma, Soviet soldiers, some Czechs, some Germans, some others, they do not go to the selection process. This is only for the Jews. And here in the middle, you can see the SS-men that are getting ready. And one of them in this nice hat on the right-hand side is a doctor. He's standing next to another SS-man. And something that is quite interesting is that this man seems to be smoking a cigarette. And this is a mystery because the SS-men were not allowed to smoke during service, during the duty. So we don't know what is happening here. And this picture is actually a little bit of a halt. The photographers asked the SS to stop working for a moment. They took a picture from the train car. They took a picture of this first line of women that you can see in the corner. So we have those two photographs together. And this is the place today. And you can see the problem that we created with the car. You can see those lines. And the idea was that we are not going to use I am not going to use any Photoshop or any artificial manipulation of the images. And so we decided to leave the place, and I told my friends from the conservation that we'll come back in 2 weeks. There will be visitors walking, there will be rain and something like this. And we came back and we still could see the car, the tire marks. So what we decided to do, we brushed some 400 meters of the space not to have the marks. And this is the picture that finally went to the album. So once again, you can see the space then and the space now. And this is how my card looked like. I tried to take multiple, until I thought that I have the proper frame, I was taking pictures. So sometimes there are 20, 30 attempts to take the proper photograph. And the site today became very helpful in finding the locations. Again, you can see the selection happening. You can see that there are actually 2 doctors simultaneously working, one with men, one with the women. There are the SS men standing. And here you can see the 2 women that were selected to work. And the only, you have the train car and very few visibility of the camp in the background, but something that helped to determine the location is I think I don't know if this picture will be, yes, this is it. Sorry about it. I just mix it in the presentation. Here you can see this little element of the this stone that is right at the track. Let me go back to the photograph, and this is why I managed to find the photograph. Some pictures in the album are just a symbol. So for example, with this one, because we do not know exactly where this woman was standing, I took the picture near a freight train car just to symbolize things like this. But here, for example, when you can see this woman and you can see the fences of the B2 sector, you can see exactly the same location today, exactly the same roads today, however, without the little rail line that you can see vaguely very close to this group that is entering into this road. But this is the road that connected the selection point with gas chambers 4 and 5. And this is the picture that should be a little bit earlier. This is another photograph. And this is a space of one of the most famous photographs from the Lily Jacob album, the very picture of the selection. The a wooden building behind was the Blockführerstube, the SS office of the women camp, which is in the background. And behind that building, and this is what allowed me to find the proper frame, is the building of the bathhouse, of the disinfection station. So this is the place today. And you can see an SS man, his face is hidden here. This is Hans Stilo, one of several SS doctors, and he's looking at this older gentleman, and he will join this large group of men standing in the corner, and they will be taken to gas chambers. So we have to remember that usually 75–80% of the Jews are murdered. Some 20–25% became prisoners. That's the usual statistics. And so all the children up to certain height, physical development, all old people, disabled people, people sometimes who wear eyeglasses, pregnant women, parents or adults together with little children, because the SS tries to avoid panic. So this is they give them hope. They tell Jews that this is resettlement. The Jews see the camp around them, so they see buildings and some sort of life. So hope became the weapon in this industrialized form of extermination. So here you can see that location of the very moment of selection, which is the unique part of the story. Here is the photograph again of the selection. You can see a woman. You can see a few people wearing Jews that Hungarian Jews were forced to wear. And here is the location today. Today you can actually count the number of fence posts, and this actually helps us to build this frame. And another photograph where the fence became very helpful to find the location. Here you can see men who are selected to be prisoners. Many of them are rather younger, although you can see some older people there. So, or maybe I'm wrong. And when I look at some of these young people in the front, we're not exactly sure, of course, in this situation, but this is the location today. And the same fences, when you look at the alignment of the posts, this is what allows us this precision today. And I think something that is very powerful in the concept that I built is the combination of two realities. Here you can see the platform again, and you can see thousands of people in this photograph. And when you look at the same place today, it will be completely empty. But in this picture, you have something interesting. When you look at on the left-hand side, you can see a girl, not the first person from the left, but the second person from the left, leaving after being selected. It's a young girl, it's a teenage girl. She became a prisoner. This is Irene Weiss. And many, many years later, I had an honor of guiding a group of scholars from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., together with Irene Weiss. And we were standing in another location at Birkenau, and she was looking at the picture of Jews who were waiting there to be killed in a gas chamber. And in this very picture, you can see her two siblings and her mother. And this is Irene Weiss the lady who was selected here, standing at that location many, many years later, pointing to her siblings. And this is a unique moment, as you can imagine, which is very, very important. And as I said, this is the location of the platform today. Another picture, we start with the emptiness. And here is the site today. Again, you can see lines of people in the background walking towards gas chambers 2 and 3. These are the Hungarian Jews that are deported. Another photograph where you can see the entrance to the same road and you can see the same gate today. There are a few interesting moments in the album when you analyze it, and some people tell me or told me that I was the first person who actually noticed this, that there are 3 pictures that actually form a panorama. The photographer stopped on the road, took 3 photographs from 3 different angles, but when you look carefully, you can see that the same person ends a picture and the same person starts, which means there is this continuity of the line, although of course this is not a proper panoramic image. So you can see this, the same a man standing on those edges. So when we know this and when we know where they are located and when we also see the fences behind, we are actually able to completely recreate this set of photographs. Again, this is the panorama, and this is the place in the contemporary site of the former camp. And there are a few pictures that are very important. And because what the SS photographers didn't want to show, they didn't want to show the killing. And we have no photographs of the murder. We do not really have the photographs from the inside the buildings of the gas chambers. But here is a picture where in front we can see women and children. So we know that these people were selected to be murdered. And in the back, you can see the building of gas chamber and crematorium number 3, where these people were led to. Maybe they were led to gas chamber number 2, we don't know, but we can see the building of the crematoria in a very close proximity of those Hungarian Jews. And this is the place today. This is where they were standing. You can see the ruins of gas chamber and crematorium number 3 in the background. And again, something that helps to identify it is the location of the chimney and the fence posts that you can see in here. And there is a part of the Lily Jacob album that we wanted to include in the whole project, but we knew that we will not be able to find a proper location. And the forest near gas chambers number 4, number 5 is this place. We do not exactly know where these people are sitting. We know more or less because what we look in the background. So we decided to be approximately accurate because it was so important to present. This is the moment in the story of Auschwitz where there is too little gas chamber space sometimes, and people are waiting to be killed because the system is not efficient enough. And so these people are told to wait in the forest several hundred meters or 100, 200 meters from the gas chambers. But also when we look at the pictures, we can see that they do not understand where they are. And this is why the hope, telling people that this is going to be a shower, telling people that this is going to be disinfection and so on, was so efficient. And we can see that in many testimonies. There is a testimony of Imre Kertész, a Hungarian Jew survivor, later a writer and a Nobel Prize winner, who was standing on a platform and he saw some prisoners behind a fence playing football. And these were actually privileged prisoners from the men's hospital. And in his teenage mind, the reflection was that if in this new place you are allowed to play football, then this place cannot be that bad. And it shows that this perspective of people entering into some kind of a big camp was an element of giving people hope, the same that the story of disinfection and therefore separation was something quite natural. And here is the picture of after the killing. The property remained. people were murdered. And this is the sector B2G or Effektenlager or Canada 2, the storage for property. This is where property was sorted, disinfected. And because none of these buildings survives today, I thought that this will be impossible to find a proper frame. But when you look very carefully to the roof of at the roof of this building, you can see on the left-hand side two strange structures sticking out, and then there's another similar structure in the very back. And when we noticed this, when we analyzed the photographs, we knew that these are chimneys of the crematoria, and only one barracks could stand and be covering these buildings that way. So this is the place that you can see today. The women who are working in the Canada Commando, sorting the shoes, a very, this was considered to be a good work unit. These people had access to the belongings. They find food. They sometimes smuggle things to the camp. These people had to be clean. And there is this property that are brought by the Jewish people. And this all is the income that the camp could generate. And this is one of the most painful photographs for me, because I really wanted to find this place. This picture is very symbolic. We do not see the faces of these people, but we know that this is a grandmother with her great-grandchildren walking towards gas chambers. And it seemed that there is a building visible on the other side. There is this rail line, so we knew more or less where this could be. And I thought that this might be the location, but it wasn't. And this was the only place in today's memorial where we have those two shorter posts at the main one, which means that today we are not able to trace this particular location in the at the site of Birkenau. Another picture where you can see the building of the gas chamber and the crematorium. And in those pictures, which is also quite, you can see that some people are looking at the cameraman, some people are eating. You can see a lot of details when we analyze the close-ups of those frames. And in those photographs, we can see some tremendous personal details. Look here. There's a boy probably having something in his mouth, but there's this little boy holding this big book. And what is this book? We don't know. But assuming that many of them would be religious Jews, it might be something linked with this, but we will never know. Another photograph that you've already seen, you can see the prisoners, you can see a lot of luggage that is already piled up in the back. But again, with the close-ups, you can see a pushchair, you can see some individual objects, and some of these objects we still have at the memorial site. Another photograph where we can see some prisoners, and these are actually Dutch Jews from the Canada Commando. But in this picture, you can see a few other interesting things. First of all, again, there's a boy with a book standing just during the selection process. You can see this woman with a baby in her arms. And there's also one more interesting thing. You can see this conversation. There is a man with no trousers, wearing one sock. There is an SS-man he talks to. There is a prisoner who translates. And you can see the reaction of people, especially those standing behind them. They're all looking at them. There is this man in the corner that tries to see what is happening. And this curiosity that people show, the curiosity that they want to learn what this conversation is about, the curiosity about the place that they arrive to, it also shows us that the Hungarian Jews that are deported to Auschwitz in May, June, July 1944, most of them do not really know what awaits them. This is the paradox of this time of the war and the system that the Nazis built in Auschwitz, the lie and the hope that is used as a weapon. And here's again another unique photograph of Jewish people sitting in the grass, on the grass here near the crematorias. And here we can see a very young boy holding a dandelion, showing this to another child, which is a very human thing to do. This is what children do. And the German photographer captured that moment just a few maybe minutes, maybe hours before those children were murdered. And we can also look at those micro-histories when we look at the Lily Jacob album, when we talk about the story of people who were deported. So now a few more things I'd like to point out before you will ask questions, if there are any, of course. First of all, the fate of the Hungarian Jews in the camp. The transports of Hungarian Jews arrived at Auschwitz concentration camp at the time when its greatest expansion had peaked. And when you look at Birkenau camp in this will be late 1944, you can see also a few things here, except the highlighted parts, and this is where most of the Hungarian Jews were located. But you can see when you look at the area at the top, you can see the fenced buildings of gas chambers and the crematoria, and you can see the smoke. And this smoke came from the burning pits. During that time, the camp had to use both the crematorias and the burning pits because of the efficiency. And we can actually see the smoke. You can see the buildings of gas chambers, crematoria, Canada, and those two highlighted parts, the sector B2C and parts of the B3, was where the Hungarian Jews were located. And during some of the construction work already in this part of Birkenau on the right-hand side halted. And the number of prisoners of Birkenau around that time is closing to 90,000. And the numbers of prisoners that were arriving at Birkenau exceeded the demand of not only Auschwitz and the local industry. On the other hand, the SS continued to expand the network of subcamps in the territory of Upper Silesia, so around Auschwitz. So therefore, the transports of Jews from Hungary only in part served to complete the prisoner numbers in the new subcamps, old subcamps, and within the Auschwitz system. Actually, the majority of those Jews were sent to other concentration camps in the Third Reich. And so they were sent to Auschwitz to go through the selection. Those who deemed to be fit and healthy were sent to work, and the sick and the elderly and children were murdered. So Birkenau at that time became also a huge reservoir of slave labor. And this is something we also have to remember when we talk about this phase of the existence of the camp. And this could be done only in Auschwitz because in the spring of 1944, it was the only place with still operational gas chambers and efficient crematoria to murder them. So on one hand, you can see when we look at the story of the Hungarian Jews that they were still alive in spring of 1944, whereas in most of the German-controlled Europe, Jews were already exterminated. But on the other hand, we can also see the uniqueness of their tragic fate because of the context of the time of their deportations, the context of the situation of Hungary in this very complex world, and it is all linked with the story of Auschwitz. And here we get to the numbers, which is also very important. You will find information in older historical research that 437,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz. This was a figure based on reports from Edmund Wesermeyer at the German embassy at Budapest. However, the recent verification, and we used several different types of documents, and we used rail transports documents that indicate that about 420,000 Jews were deported within this peak phase from mid-May to early July 1944. And together with additional small groups that were deported later in 1944, and those 3.8 thousand Jews that were deported in April, we have the number of approximately 430,000 Hungarian Jews. And what we also have to remember is that the story of Hungary is again linked with what is happening with the Allied governments. In 1944, there are a few people who escaped Auschwitz, and so also some other sources that confirm what happens to Jews deported from Hungary. And the report that was partly prepared by Rudolf Vrba and Alfred Wetzler, several other sources, it gave the possibility to the Allied government to put pressure on the Horthy regime to actually halt the deportations in mid-July. But when we look at the situation in Hungary, also there were also some 15 transport Jews who were deported to labor in Austria. There were some Jews who were deported to Bergen-Belsen, 1,700 people. And some new records that we also discovered like a notes of the kappa of the clothing warehouse, revealed that after the selections, some 52,000 Jewish men were kept in the camp. It could be also a very similar number of women. So this data would suggest that out of those 430,000 Jews deported to Auschwitz, between 325 and 330,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered in the gas chambers upon arrival. So we have a period of 56 days where approximately 1/3 of the victims of Auschwitz is murdered. Please remember Auschwitz, we talk about 1.3 million people deported and 1.1 million victims. And among those victims, there's approximately 1 million Jews, 75,000 Polish prisoners, a little bit over 21,000 Roma and Sinti, some 14,000 Soviet soldiers, and some 12,000 others. So 1 million Jews murdered in Auschwitz, but 1/3 of the victims. This is the spirit of 56 days of the transports. So this is really the peak moment. And when we look at those Jews who entered into Birkenau, we have some 25 to 30,000 registered in the camp, and they receive prisoners' numbers and tattoos. Another 25,000, primarily women, either died in transit camps or were killed in secondary selections, and around 45,000 were transported to other camps in Germany. So we have different elements of the story of Auschwitz, the story of situation of the Third Reich at that time, the story of Hungary coming together in this unique situation. And just to end, you can see the transport. These are the number of people deported from the train station in Košice. There was a rail line worker who kept records of the transport. So you can see the regularity. If we assume that one transport is usually 3,000 people, you will see that on most days you have 2, 3, 4 transports crossing the rail station in Košice. There are 8 transports that went the other train stations. So this is not the full traffic of Hungarian Jews. So you can see some gaps. But you can see this regularity. And here is a part of the research of Piotr Setkiewicz, the head of our research center. And this is something that is not yet 100% verified. But here we can see something very interesting. We can see a number of trains that are deported to Auschwitz between 26 and 28 of May 1944. And we believe, because when we look at the notes from the Bekleidung office, from the clothes storage, we can see that clothes for all these transports were probably given on one day. And this will be 28th of May of 1944. So it means that it is possible that within 24 hours, 27,163 Jews arrived at Auschwitz. 27,000 people, probably in 24 hours, which means it is 2% of the people deported to Auschwitz arriving on one day. And Auschwitz works for 4.5 years. And this would be the peak of the peaks in this operation. And from the documents from the camp, we can see that a little bit over 3,000 clothes were given to men. We can assume that a similar number was given to women, which means it is likely that around 20,000 Hungarian Jews who arrived in this 24 hours are murdered. And in terms of course, every individual is a story and it's a tragedy. And I think part of my presentation about the photographs from the Lydia Jacob albums focused on the individuals' faces, what happened to people, what people felt, what people were lied to. And this is something very important. But when we look at the industrial part of the Auschwitz system, this horrifying statistics of 27,000 people arriving on one day is also something that leaves us sometimes hopeless, powerless, when we try to understand the tragedy of this particular part of the story. So here you can see some of the camps to which the Hungarian Jews were later deported. So many, you can see many large camps, some cities, the labor, many Hungarian Jews were left, of course, with the death marches from Auschwitz. And at the end, of course, from those 750,000 Jews that became part of Hungary as the result of the changes before the Second World War, and everything seems that Hungary may be the haven for the Jews because the war is coming to an end. We actually do not see much survivors. And even those Jews from Budapest, for example, that didn't go through the deportation, there are marches of death along the Danube. And finally, there are many Jews who are killed in the Soviet operation. So not many Hungarian Jews managed to survive. So this is the particular uniqueness of the story that we are commemorating this year, the 80th anniversary of all these events that climaxed in these 56 days of operation of Auschwitz. And this is what I wanted basically to say. I do apologize for this sometimes very superficial going through some of the changes, but I do hope that you may have more understanding, first of all, on the complexity of the story of the Hungarian Jews, but also maybe you will look a little bit different at this unique historical source, the Lily Jacob album, and you can go to the Yad Vashem website and you can look at those pictures today, and you will be able to discover much more when you understand these contexts and when you know how to search. And some of you visited the memorial, some of you maybe will see the memorial. Again, these pictures allow us to walk through the site on a completely different level of human emotions and the human experience of this place. So thank you very much. And if there are questions, and if I can give answers to those questions, I'll try to do that.
Thank you so much, Paweł, for absolutely riveting talk. And there are questions. We will take maybe another 15 to 20 minutes of your time, if you are okay with that.
I am okay, yes.
You can close maybe the presentation.
Okay,
that
of course.
we can see you properly and engage with you. And please, first of all, really unbelievable unpacking of the story. And one of the questions that Patrick is asking is, through the pictures, the Lily Jacob album, but other sources, some of the SS officers, some of the guards, some of the others were recognized. You mention some names, not only of officers and doctors, but also of others. Through research, how much can you find out? And maybe can you speak beyond Patrick's question about the research, the collections? What do you discover all the time, and what can you add? For example, this document that you shared with us of the 20th of May 1944 is a document I never seen. So how can you describe a little bit of the research and finding out new information to this day?
So the Auschwitz Memorial has a research department, and actually we have full-time historians, and whose only job from 7 to 3 is to research the story of Auschwitz, because it seems that we know everything already about Auschwitz. But we still have gaps and we still miss details. And today the possibility is that we are looking once again, and I always like saying we, but I'm just part of the institution. I'm not doing the research. My job is to be the voice of this research that my colleagues in the historical department, the research department are doing. But very often they look at some documents that were just seemed not so much important. And by looking at many different documents from the same period, we can draw some conclusions. And I could give just a few examples. One example is the document. I mean, what I showed you is just the graph of the numbers, but we have those documents from the capo of this clothing department, who actually noted for many, many weeks how many sets of clothing are leaving. So, which means how many prisoners are are registered in the camp, and because we have a huge lack of documentation in terms of, especially the Hungarian Jews, we do not have, like we have in many the case of transports of Jews from occupied France or from the occupied Netherlands. When we know the initial number, we know how many numbers were given. In the story of the Hungarian Jews, we do not have these documents, but thanks to having, for example, those documents from the train station, and we exactly know how many people were on a train leaving the station or going through the station, if we know the approximate time of travel and we have the document and we know how many clothes were given to men, we can make this this research. Another case, when we also talk about the story of the Sonderkommando and the story of the crematoria, we know that, for example, the Germans were very careful not to use words like gas chamber, extermination, killing, and so on in the official documents. And usually on the high-level documents, blueprints, reports that are sent to Berlin, they are very careful. But there are many, many documents that are tiny. For example, there was a work unit in Birkenau. And the kappa of the work unit had to write a daily report of the work because based on these reports, the camp could calculate many things. And these documents never we're never supposed to leave the drawers of this one work unit. And for example, you'll find documents where it says that a group of carpenters had to make 4 gas-proof hatches for a gas camera, and the word gas chamber is used over there. And so we are now trying to have this kind of a forensic approach, not only looking at those key documents or blueprints, but trying to find details in multiple different things and also many different archives. For example, many of the identities of the Hungarian Jews that became prisoners of Auschwitz are not known in Auschwitz because the Germans destroyed a lot of documents. But we also know that many of those Hungarian Jews were very quickly deported to other camps. So there are research projects that we do with several memorials in Germany and Arolsen archives, because those people arrived to camps like Dachau or Buchenwald and were registered there. But in their registration files, it would indicate that they came from Auschwitz. And for example, their Auschwitz number may be there. We have the name. Sometimes we have the image, which again, we do not have because prisoners in 1944 in Auschwitz were not photographed. So there are numerous different things. And of course, in the story there is the edition of the Lily Jacob album, going back to the kind of an origin of this question, where together with Yad Vashem, we try to identify people. And you can buy this album, and in every picture, whenever there is a known individual, you'll find the names. But also there was an attempt of identifying some of the SS men, which is not very easy because there are very few of them visible. But like Hans Stieler, we may know a few others. So this is something that, but as you could see, there are many different details you can analyze when you look at the pictures. But please remember, if you study the Lily Jacob album photographs, you can also use multiple different sources, aerial photographs, the pictures from the Bauleitung, the building office. So you can look at the buildings from the crematoria. And then thanks to this, you can simply try getting into more detailed description.
Absolutely. And part of having the Seeing Auschwitz exhibition in South Africa was to really take all those sources and bringing them together, and also look much deeper into the details that you showed us in some of those photographs. Of course, for our listeners also to remember that we do have that album from the spring summer of 1944. We do not have such albums from 1942, 43, and so on. So we do have to remember what we have, but also what we don't have. And you gave us that picture as well through drawings, testimonies, and so on, which is really, really important. And maybe then I'll jump first of all to Catherine, Catherine's question, and maybe add a little bit there too, of putting those two together, the then and the now, and trying to understand the two together. What did you learn, or what was the learning, the deep learning from finding the location and trying to put the now to the then. So maybe that is the one question, and maybe did it give you in Auschwitz a deeper understanding in understanding some of the processes that we see in the album?
I mean, on the level of our knowledge of, for example, what happens to the transport, it is not something that would be adding a lot, I would say. But creating the album, first of all, I can be very honest. When the idea came, and the idea came from the director of the museum, Piotr Cywiński, and who came to my office and who said, Paul or Paweł, take a look at the Lee Jacob album and see what you can find. I was very pessimistic. I thought that we are not going to find so many places today, that the site is the destruction of the site after 7 decades is so big that that this project will never have that there will be no album. There will be, maybe I'll find a few. And I think something that was a discovery was that we can read the site in this way, that we can count posts that survived and look at the remains of the buildings. And then it was like a forensics that the museum staff is not forensic experts. And we look at the testimonies, we look at the pictures, but this was a completely novel thing for me when we talk about this. And the fact that these pictures were taken, maybe I could probably learn a little bit more about the workshop of the photographers that were doing the pictures, how they traveled, what play, because then again we could mark all these locations and see how they look at the pictures. And but also for me, and that's maybe more for me than the museum, because many of our historians probably look at those pictures in depth. It was this discovering of those details, that you usually look at these big images, you look at those photographs, you can see this mass of people, but you will not have the zoom options, and then you'll be trying to look at the images of faces. And we have very good resolution. We can get very good resolution photographs. So, but those pictures are important when we, for example, even when you look at the picture of the selection, and when you look at the distance between people who are leaving the central point of the selection to join this large group of men standing in the corner, when we know how fast people walk, you can actually try to time how long an SS doctor would take to judge. You can look at the, you do not really think when you look at those pictures, what time was it? And for example, this very famous selection picture is early in the morning, because we can see the shadows. So I think it for me was a lesson to look at the photograph as a historical source on a much more deeper level than we usually, we have a picture, we have the building of the crematorium, we have 2000, and then the next photograph. But when you stop at such a source and you know where to look, it is a discovery.
Absolutely. I think that it certainly humanized the victims, and it became, instead of 330,000, the child that gives the flower to another child.
But also something what is probably a huge challenge for us, when you look at this assessment who is probably smoking a cigarette at work, it also shows us that this is all done by people, that they are at work. They also are, some of them are a little bit bored, some of them are just supervising. So while this humanity of victims is essential, we can see the faces. The warning of Auschwitz is that it was done by people. And actually, when you look at the general development of the Hungarian Jews and how the camp absorbed them and how it worked, this is a huge warning that people are able to run projects like this. And there is a photograph that was taken in the SS resort, just 30 kilometers from Auschwitz, where you can see a group of SS men celebrating, and there's accordion, and they're all this high-rank SS men, the Commandant Bayer and Rudolf Hess and Josef Mengele and the head of the crematorium, but also people who put Cyclone B into the gas chambers and drivers of the trucks. Because most likely, after the end of this 56 days, the SS simply had a party. And they celebrated the successful operation. And this is, as we meet here, probably after many of our projects We invite the staff who engage, and there's a few words of thank you. And this is exactly what the assessment did. So yes, we can see the human tragedy when we look at the victims here, but we can see the human warning when we also look at the perpetrators in the album.
And I think it's really important in bringing the Hocker album, this album that was discovered much later, of the perpetrators playing accordion and laughing and yeah, bringing the children to the resort. It's really important. It brings me to conversations I had with perpetrators in Rwanda after the genocide in Rwanda that described it as going to work, coming back home, having a beer and a good meal and going to work again. And the work was killing. And it brings me to Daniel's question about the perpetrators and about the issue of regret. And Daniel is saying, I want to ask you about regret of perpetrators after the war. To my knowledge, very few regretted or showed regret about what they did. Why, and was there anything different to perpetrators of Auschwitz than to other places? Can you share any of perpetrators' reflections of Auschwitz after the war?
That will be very complicated, because as we probably, and the story of Auschwitz is unique in the way that we have so many survivors who could tell us about this place, but who could also tell us about their trauma, their suffering, their the PTSD syndrome, and so on and so on. We do not have the sources from the perpetrators, not on a private level, not on a level where we can really kind of analyze there. And so it seems that, of course, while the survivors suffered, it seems, and that would be the intuition, that the perpetrators probably didn't have this, at least to the scale that would be matchable in any way. We have a little bit of trial records, but of course here the assessment who were tried didn't really want to share about their emotions, and rather they rejected their participation in the crime. There are a few cases of like Rudolf Hess, who wrote memoirs while in the prison in Poland, and this is actually quite interesting source. We have some diaries, and I think the Johann Kremer diary, who was a substitute doctor in Auschwitz, and he kind of enters into this world kind of from the outside, and he recalls his impressions then, and he writes about horrible scenes on the platform. And it's true that what Dr. Thilo said, that Auschwitz is annus mundi, that Auschwitz is the anus of the world. And so there are bits of that. But on the other hand, I remember a situation or a document completely from outside Auschwitz, that there's a so-called Saliter report, a report of a German policeman, a regular policeman from Düsseldorf, I think. And he was at some point put in charge of leading a train of Jews from Düsseldorf to Riga. And then he comes back and he writes a report. And after the war, he was denazified and he was rejected to enter back into the police. And he tried to fight for his position in Germany for many years in court. And he at some point he wrote, I was a policeman at the Kaiser's government. I was a policeman at the Weimar Republic. I was a policeman during the Third Reich, and I'm able to serve anyone that will allow me to do this police work. So I think you can see probably for perpetrators, moving from one system to another, getting another system of values of another government was much easier than for the people who lost everyone at the platform of Auschwitz, who learn in a moment that they'll never see their relatives again, who had to live with this gap, with this trauma, with this emptiness, with this suffering every night with their nightmares. So I think on one hand, we know so much about the survivors, but there's this human gap because the perpetrators were not so eager to tell us about their challenges of doing this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in the trials, both the Auschwitz trial or later trials, very little of that is coming. There are lots of comments, Paweł, and some other questions. I'll send you the chat to see, but lots of thank yous from many. people that are saying, visit the Auschwitz few times, learn so much today from you, which is always great, and others that are just thanking you so much for all you are. You gave us in the hour and a half that you shared with us. So from all of us, and you can see the comments, I will send you the comments, but from all of us, just a thank you from the bottom of our hearts for bringing the 80th anniversary of the deportation of the Hungarian Jews to life, from photos, documents, then and now, and also historical look, from the general look to the individual look, from the victim to the perpetrator, and back to the site of Auschwitz. Thank you, Paweł. And
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much. Thank you very much, Tali, for this invitation. It was great to participate in another great event that you organized, this time online. But this technology is really helpful. Thank you, everyone who decided to spend this Thursday evening or wherever you are, maybe morning, to listen about this tragic story. This is important, of course. So thank you very much for all the questions, for all the engagement. This is what matters. The memory matters, and we all should remember together. Thank you.
Thank you. And good night, and have a great day, everyone else, and we'll see you in future events. All the best. Bye-bye.